Hi, it's Sherri from A Quilting Life, and I'm here today to share a fun tutorial. I'm actually going to show you step by step how to make the curved edge project bag from my Home and Hearth quilt book. Now you will need to get the book to have the measurements for all the parts and pieces that you'll be cutting out, but I am going to walk you step by step so that you can see every step of the way to make this fun little project bags. There are also a couple other videos that will be helpful as you make it, and we will have them linked throughout the video. One of them is how to make bias binding, which you will use for this bag. Another one is how to make this cute little zipper tab pull, and another video we have shows you how to do binding if you've never done that before, because this is bound like a traditional quilt is bound. One more thing before we get started, just have your book in hand. I will be referencing the page number and the step from that page number as I go through and explain the process of making this bag. You'll see in the introductory parts of this video that there are also a few other things you can do before you get ready to sew, like interface the parts that need to be interfaced and have everything cut out and ready to go. Okay, let's get started. Okay, before we get started, I'm just going to go over your materials, and these are found on page 63 of my Home and Hearth book. The first thing you're going to need to do is pick out some squares for the patchwork bottom of your bag, and I have actually gone ahead and sewn those together. So you can cut those squares out according to the instructions and go ahead and sew them together if you want. Another option that you can do here is you could also just pick one piece of fabric and just cut it to the measurement indicated in the book if you want to do that. Now I'm using this gray small floral for all the pieces here, which I've used the gray stripe for. Okay, so you'll be going ahead and you'll cutting those pieces as needed for, it's just a trim piece with the patchwork, and then it goes on either side of our zipper, and it also creates our handle. And you'll also notice in the materials list that you're asked to get some shape flex, which is a really thin fusible interfacing. I've actually gone ahead and fused all of my interfacing to my pieces. I feel like that's really helpful if you have everything ready to go. This piece has to be interfaced, this piece, not the smallest one. And this one was actually in one piece before I cut it together, but it has to be interfaced before I cut it apart, but it also needs to be interfaced. You'll also need fabric for your bias binding, and I've gone ahead and made that already as well, because we do have a video tutorial so you can see how to make the bias binding. But the book will tell you how large of a square that you need to cut so that you can make this binding. And so I use this soft coral floral, and that's for where we have the, the binding on our bag. I also have a video for how to make this little zipper tab pull, and so we'll refer you to that video for that as well, and I've also already made that. So if you want to go ahead, and this is something that can be done after the bag is completely finished, you just add that little zipper tab. You'll need a zipper, and I really like the by Annie zippers. They're wider. You can see that that width contributes to the size of the bag, so you will want to purchase a by Annie zipper for this, or your measurements might be a little bit off. I guess what it would do is make your bag not as tall, and you could adjust if you have to use another type of zipper. But just to know, if you don't use the by Annie zipper, your bag will be a little bit smaller. I get my clear vinyl from by Annie also. It's just her clear premium weight vinyl. So I'll be using that for the vinyl section of the bag. Finally, you'll want to have two fabrics that are included in your materials list, and one is for the bag back and one is for the other side of that. It becomes actually the part that you can see through the vinyl. So for this one, I used the gray for my inside and the citrine on the back. But this time, I've already got this quilted. I think I'm going to put the gray on the back this time so that my blueprint shows through the vinyl. This has already been quilted with Soft and Stable. Let me just show you. I will sometimes just take a couple large pieces of fabric to my quilter and have her quilt them with the Soft and Stable inside, and then I can cut it up and make bags and other projects that I want to use with the Soft and Stable. And I just keep this in my sewing room ready to go. So if I want to make a bag, I have this quilted and ready to go. I usually keep it rolled up so it doesn't get wrinkled. If you're not familiar with Soft and Stable, you can buy it. This is a large package that's 72 by 58, but you don't need to buy it this big. It comes in smaller packages, and I'll actually link some smaller packages that would be big enough for this project bag. She sells it pre-cut for placemats, and I actually almost think those would be small enough to make these project bags. So I will link the Soft and Stable to you for that. Okay, so that is everything that you need, and now we can get started. Okay, we're going to start out right on page 65 with making the bag front. And as I mentioned earlier, I have already sewn my patchwork squares together for step number 1. And you can press those seams. In the book, it tells you to press them open. You can press them in one direction. That doesn't really matter. But the next thing we're going to do is in step 2, we're going to actually sew the gray rectangle to the top of that and make that one complete unit, which we'll have right here. So I will go ahead and sew this together and come right back. What we're actually doing right now is making this bottom section of the bag. And you can't see it from the top, but there's actually, this is going to be lined on the inside so that these raw edges aren't inside the bag. So that's what we're going to do next, and we're actually going to be adding the vinyl. So I've cut the vinyl, but I've kept it together with the paper just to show you that leave that together. It just makes the vinyl easier to handle until you're just ready to sew. Okay, so this is our strip for right here. And the gray stripe is actually now the gray floral. And this is going to be the lining fabric. I've already fused the interfacing to it from step 3. And this is all on page 65. We're going to be on page 65 for a while, so I'll tell you when we move to another page. But I did go ahead from step 3 and fuse the interfacing. And I've got this. And now we're actually going to sew these two pieces to the vinyl. The vinyl is going to be sandwiched in between them. And I'm going to grab my Clover Wonder clips because we don't want to use pins with the vinyl. Okay, so I'm going to line my vinyl up with my interfaced gray, and I'm just going to use a few Wonder clips to hold it together. And you'll see the vinyl, it can be a little bit tricky to work with, but Wonder clips are great. They are kind of a must-have when working with the vinyl. Okay, and next we are going to add this to the top. And we are going to actually place it right on top, and I'm going to use those same clips. I might add another one right here. So we've got the interfaced piece of gray floral fabric, and we've got our vinyl sandwiched in between the top of our patchwork unit. And I'm going to go and I'm going to sew that with a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, I just wanted to come back. I'm back from the sewing machine. And you know, vinyl can sometimes be tricky to sew on, but here it shouldn't be hard at all because you have a fabric piece underneath it and a fabric piece on top. So your plate on your machine and your foot, neither one of them are touching vinyl. They're just touching fabric. So I sewed that 1/4 inch seam, and now what I'm going to do, and this part you have to be really careful, but you're going to pull this out, and I just finger press it. And I'm actually going to take this to the iron, but you have to be careful. You cannot touch the vinyl with your iron. But I'm just going to press kind of down here and keep my iron right along that edge, because then we're going to top stitch 1/4 inch away right there. And I'll show you where that's been top stitched on here. So we're going to just press it so it lays flat, and then top stitch right there. So I'm going to go press that and top stitch it and then come back. So we're going to set this section aside now, and we're actually going to work on our zipper unit up for the top. Okay, so you're going to take, and this is from step 4, where you fuse the interfacing to the long gray rectangle, and then you actually cut it in half, so that we're going to have 2 separate pieces to make either side of our zipper unit. And so what you're going to do, and I've also cut my zipper longer than we are going to need. It's just easier to work with that way. You can end up cutting off these ends. They'll be enclosed with the binding. So I'm going to sew this right sides together. I'm actually going to keep the zipper kind of out of the way right now. Right sides together with this side of the zipper tape. And I'm going to use the Clover Wonder clips. This is going to be for our top section. And I'm going to sew that with 1/4 inch seam, and then I'm going to press it up like I did before, and I'm also going to top stitch right there. So I'll come back and show you that. Okay, so I sewed that. I aligned the raw edges with the zipper as I showed you. I sewed it, and then I did that little top stitch. So what I'm left with on the back is really neat. Sometimes a little bit of the raw edges will poke out through the zipper, but usually it's not very much. And I've got this folded finished edge at the top. Now we're going to actually do the same thing at the bottom of the zipper. And here the most important thing is to keep these 2 gray pieces lined up. Okay, so I'm going to just really carefully keep it on top of this one so I can keep them lined up. And I'm going to add my Wonder clips. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to sew 1/4 inch seam, and then I'm going to top stitch. You can tell that there's a little top stitching right there. And for all of this point, it's okay that the zipper pull is over here. We are going to trim this in a minute, and then you will have to be sure to move the zipper pull, and I will actually show that when I trim it. But for right now, I've lined up the raw edge with the bottom of the zipper. I'm going to go sew the 1/4 inch seam and press it and top stitch it. Okay, so I've got these 2 sections actually sewn on either part of the zipper. Let me just tell you, the hardest part of making this bag is now done. We are on the easy side now, and this wasn't even hard. What you are going to do though now is make sure this zipper pull is in the center of the zipper, and you're going to trim both sides. And it actually tells you exactly how long to trim it to in step 5. And what you also might want to do, and what I will do when I go over to the sewing machine, is I'm just going to tack a couple stitches on either end just to make sure that my zipper pull doesn't accidentally, this whole thing doesn't come apart. So you're going to trim to the size specified in step 5. Do a little tack stitch across both ends of your zipper, and make sure before you cut this off that this zipper pull is in the middle. Okay, so I'm back. I've trimmed it. I've back stitched over here to make sure that my zipper pull won't be able to slide off either end. I Everything's top stitched. I did just want to make one note. The instructions for this part of the assembly in step 5 in the book are slightly different than what I just showed you. The method that I showed you here is my preferred method because it gives you finished folded edges on the top of the bottom and the bottom when we go to attach it to this unit. As it's written, that works fine as well, but if you're watching the video, you might as well go ahead and do it this way. Okay, our next step is we're going to complete the top of the bag, and this is super simple. We're just going to sew this to the vinyl. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than before because we will have vinyl without any fabric underneath it. So I'm going to show you a little trick that I like to do. But first, you're going to Wonder clip this together. Okay. Remember when we cut our vinyl, how there is this paper that comes with the vinyl and makes it so it can wrap up together. What you want to do is take a little piece of that paper, and what I do is I just kind of put it on my sewing machine, and as I sew, I just use the vinyl to kind of, or the paper, to kind of keep that vinyl separated from my sewing machine so that it doesn't stick. Now they also do have special Teflon feet that some people get, but if you don't want to get a special Teflon foot, just use the paper kind of as a buffer in between. And so you can see that this, we're going to also top stitch right there after we sew that. So I'm going to go over to the machine. I'm going to sew that. You're going to press it toward the gray fabric without touching the vinyl. And by pressing, I mean on this step, I feel like it's just going to be a finger press. And then you can top stitch it. So when I come back, then we'll have the bag front completely done. Okay, I'm back and we have our bag front completed, and that completes step 6, which is actually on page 66. Now, just at the bottom of page 66 are the instructions for making the bag back, and it tells you to put your 2 fabrics together with your soft and stable in between, and to quilt as desired. You can do this as simple as you want. You can do vertical or horizontal lines if you want it more simple. This is just a crosshatch. I showed you the picture in the beginning that it came from. So anyway, you're going to have this completed and this completed, and we're actually going to, they should actually be really close to the same size. If they're not exactly the same size, then just trim the bag back as needed. It looks like I'm going to have to trim about 3/8 of an inch off here to make mine the same size. But that's why this was actually set out to be plenty big so that you shouldn't have an issue. Okay, so I'm going to trim this down a little bit, but we're going to take one more step, and this is one of the things that I love most about this bag is having the rounded edges. And there's actually a nifty little, you can use anything. You can use a bowl, a glass, a large thread spool. But I really do like these little creative grids. There's one that's the smallest size, the 2.5 inch size. And I'm just going to use that to trim my corners and so that to round my edges. Okay, I'm going to trim this and I'm going to round both of these edges, and then we're going to baste this together. I'm back. I've got that just kind of basted together. I actually didn't baste it at the top, although I can. I want to just tack this handle down first, and to do that we need to make the handle. So we're going to take our remaining piece of gray fabric. We are on step 2 on page 67 just to make the handle, and it's super simple. It's just a basic handle. We're going to sew this together, right sides together. We're going with a 1/4 of an inch seam, and then we're going to turn it inside out. Both of the edges can be raw because they're going to be enclosed in the binding. But what I do like to do is move that seam to the middle so that it doesn't add extra bulk on one of the edges. So we're going to, when we turn it inside out, move that seam to the middle before we press it. And I'll come back and we will attach the handle and we'll baste the top, and then we're ready to bind. Okay, I'm back. I actually did go ahead and edge stitch this top just so that it wouldn't move while I'm attaching the handle. And I finished the handle, so I turned it inside out. I've got my seam in the back. And then I noticed on my original bag that I had edge stitched just about 1/8 of an inch away from either edge. It's not in the instructions, but I went ahead and did that too, just a little right along the edge. And so now we're going to baste the handle on before we add the binding. And for that, I'm going to use 2 Wonder Clips. And I like to put my handles, I'm going to turn this one over so you can see. So we're going to put this right side up, and we're just going to kind of fold it like that. And that way the front of the bag, you know, you see the pretty side, and the seam side is kind of underneath. And the way I do the handles is I go 2 inches from this side, from one side of the bag, and I put the handle there and add a Wonder Clip. And then I just do the same thing, and I go 2 inches from this side of the bag, and I put a Wonder Clip. You could mark it with a pin or a marker, but I just usually have my Wonder Clips right there in my ruler. Anyway, so we're just going to baste this just, you know, in between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch right there, so that this will stay in place while we're at our binding. And then our final step really is to add the binding. And what I generally do is I generally start somewhere down here in this lower edge or at the bottom. I'm not going to start and finish my binding up at the top. I also don't want to have to start and finish it at the curve. So either right here on the straight or right down here before you get to the curve. And so you're just going to use, and this is bias binding. It will stretch around these curves. And it's a soft, gentle curve anyway, so you're not going to have a problem at all. So I'm actually going to go over there. I'm going to tack these handles down, and I'm going to machine stitch my binding to the front of the bag. Okay, so I'm back. I basted those handles on. It's really as good to do that before you sew the binding on, so that it doesn't kind of shift, and not try to do that at the same step. And I also did the binding. I decided to stop and end it down here at the bottom. It worked out really well. I also wanted to mention that when you come around these corners at the top of the bag, it's just like you're binding a quilt. And so if we do have a binding video where you can see exactly how to fold that when you come to a corner on a quilt. Something that I do before I go ahead and stitch it down is sometimes I will trim just a touch out of these corners, just to make it a little easier for that binding to go around. But then at this point, I am just going to Wonder Clip my binding, and I will, you can do a couple things. You can hand stitch it back on the, hand stitch it down on the back, which I actually like to do. You can machine stitch it, but with this vinyl, it's a little bit tricky, so it almost is on this bag with that vinyl, just easier to just hand stitch it down on the back. I guess I don't need to really go all the way around to show you, but so I'll just continue going around and I'll hand stitch it down. I did want to show you, I've already made my zipper pull. I just fold those in half, and we have a video for this, we'll link that. And I just kind of put it through the zipper, pull it tight, and then I knot the end. Just kind of pull that, and then I usually trim these ends just on the diagonal. And so there you have it. We've got our zipper bag ready to go. Okay, I hope you enjoyed today's video how to make this project bag from my Home and Hearth quilt book. As you saw just right at the end there, all I have to do is stitch down my binding and I'm ready to go. I'm super excited to have another bag for another project. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit the subscribe button, share it with a friend, and hit the like button. Thanks so much for stopping by.